He was nothing in the world's eyes, yet somehow, he became everything I never knew I wanted. It's punchy, emotionally charged, and immediately sets up the slow burn age gap romance tension. If you want, I can also give 5 alternative hooks, so you can pick the one that hits hardest for YouTube viewers. The first time he noticed her, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a spark that hit like lightning, but it lingered in a quiet, persistent way that refused to let him look away. She moved through the room with an effortless grace, the kind that made even the mundane, pouring coffee, checking a schedule, feel almost cinematic. He couldn't explain why, but there was something magnetic about the way she carried herself. She was confident without arrogance, aware of the attention she drew, but never flaunting it. Yet beneath that polished exterior, he sensed traces of something softer, something quietly vulnerable, like a delicate rhythm hidden under a steady heartbeat. He caught himself noticing the small details. The way her fingers lingered on the edge of a book she was holding. The faint crease at the corner of her eyes when she laughed. The soft tilt of her head when she listened to someone speak, attentive and unhurried. She didn't have to try to be captivating, she simply was. And he, standing there quietly in the background, felt the odd, unsettling pull of wanting to be noticed by her, even though he convinced himself she would never see him that way. There was a brief, almost accidental moment when their eyes met. A subtle glance, nothing more than a heartbeat, yet it felt charged, electric in its simplicity. He noticed how her gaze lingered slightly longer than polite conversation required, and for a fraction of a second, he dared to imagine she might be curious about him, too. He quickly dismissed the thought, telling himself she probably looked that way at everyone, yet the memory of that gaze stayed with him, haunting the edges of his mind. The air between them seemed to carry its own weight. As she moved past him, a hint of her perfume brushed against his senses, soft, warm, comforting, like a whisper he couldn't quite place. It stayed with him long after she had gone, lingering in the corners of his awareness, a reminder that she existed in a world he felt only partially allowed to enter. Even the simplest interactions, the exchange of a pen, the passing of a folder, felt charged. Her hand brushed his, just for a moment, and though the contact was fleeting, it left a strange, warm imprint that his mind replayed endlessly. He found himself drawn not only to her beauty or poise, but to the subtle contradictions she embodied, strong yet vulnerable, poised yet unguarded when she thought no one was looking. Every small gesture hinted at layers beneath the surface, experiences, sorrows, joys, and quiet triumphs he could only imagine. And as he watched her from the periphery, he began to feel the first stirrings of something dangerous, something he didn't fully understand yet, a desire to know her, not as an idea or a fantasy, but as a person. For the first time, he realized that the world's judgments and his own insecurities didn't matter. Here was someone he admired, someone who moved through life with an elegance he could barely grasp, and yet, inexplicably, she had already begun to occupy a space in his thoughts, a space no one else had. And in that subtle, almost imperceptible way, a slow-burn fascination began, a fascination that would soon demand more than his casual observation. It would demand his heart. The next encounter was not planned, and yet it felt inevitable, as if the universe had decided they needed to cross paths again. This time, it wasn't a brief glance across a room, but a moment that required presence, attention, and words. A shared task, something ordinary, mundane even, created a bridge between them. Perhaps it was a meeting, a collaborative project, or simply reaching for the same book on a crowded shelf. Whatever the circumstance, it forced them into conversation, and for the first time, he truly heard her. Her voice was soft, but confident, carrying warmth that seemed to fill the space around her. It wasn't the kind of warmth that demanded attention, it invited it. He noticed the subtle nuances, the slight catch in her breath when she laughed, the careful way she chose her words, the pause before she admitted a small, personal truth. It was during these small admissions, fleeting and delicate, that the first threads of connection were woven. He realized she wasn't just the polished figure he had admired from afar. She had layers, depth, and quiet vulnerabilities that she didn't broadcast but let slip in moments of trust. He, in turn, found himself revealing small truths he usually kept tucked away. Perhaps he mentioned a fleeting worry, a habit, or an obscure preference, something human, unpolished, and entirely sincere. He didn't even notice he was doing it until he saw her eyes soften, a subtle signal that she understood, that she accepted him without judgment. It was the first time he felt that quiet, mutual acknowledgement that they were more than strangers in a shared space. Physical proximity became an unspoken language. Sitting across from her, he felt the faint brush of knees under a table, a contact so accidental it could have been ignored, but couldn't be. Every slight movement carried weight, every shared glance lingered longer than necessary, every subtle smile hinted at emotions neither was ready to name. He became acutely aware of the warmth of her presence, the gentle rhythm of her gestures, and the soft cadence of her voice that seemed to wrap around his attention like a quiet embrace. He began noticing patterns, small behaviors that revealed her unique rhythm, how she tilted her head when concentrating, the way her fingers traced the edge of a notebook absent-mindedly, the faint shiver in her laugh that spoke of suppressed excitement or nervous energy. And with each detail, his fascination deepened. He wasn't just observing, he was participating in the silent dialogue of human connection, feeling the magnetic pull of someone who seemed both impossibly graceful and deeply accessible at the same time. By the end of their encounter, he felt a strange, bittersweet ache. He wanted to linger, to stretch the moment just a little longer, but reality pulled them apart. Yet, even as they parted, a quiet certainty lingered. This connection, unexpected, delicate, and unspoken, was only the beginning. Somewhere between her soft smiles and the brush of her hand, the spark had been struck. He couldn't yet name it, but he knew the world had shifted just slightly, in a way that would pull them together again, despite hesitation, despite distance, despite everything he had ever told himself about boundaries and what was possible. By now, he could no longer pretend their interactions were casual. Something had shifted, an invisible thread drawing him closer to her with every passing day. He found himself noticing the small, intimate details, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint crease that appeared between her brows when she was thinking, the soft sigh that escaped her lips when she exhaled after a long day. Each gesture, each nuance, became a map he wanted to trace, a language he wanted to learn. And he realized, with equal parts wonder and disbelief, that she was doing the same with him, subtle, measured, yet unmistakably attentive. Their conversations began to linger longer than before. He noticed how she leaned in just slightly when listening, how her gaze held his a beat longer than necessary, how she tilted her head, an almost imperceptible motion, signaling curiosity or approval. It was as though the world outside the two of them had faded into soft focus, leaving only this quiet, delicate exchange of attention and care. He found himself carefully observing her reactions, wondering what thoughts passed behind her eyes, and marveling at how someone so self-assured could reveal such small, vulnerable windows of herself. Even the simplest, most ordinary moments carried weight. Walking side by side, the occasional brush of their shoulders or the accidental meeting of hands felt electric, yet neither made a move to break the connection. He began to realize that their proximity was more than physical, it was emotional, a shared space charged with the silent language of longing and curiosity. Each fleeting contact, the grazing of fingers, the subtle shift in posture when they laughed together, created a tension that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. He also became acutely aware of the contrast between them. She had lived longer, experienced more, and carried herself with a quiet wisdom that both intimidated and inspired him. He, younger and perhaps less guarded by life's lessons, felt a strange mixture of inadequacy and exhilaration. He wondered if she noticed his hesitation, his self-doubt, or if she simply saw him for what he was: sincere, observant, and genuinely captivated by her presence. And he secretly hoped it was the latter. Their connection began to seep into moments when neither expected it. A shared coffee break became an opportunity for lingering glances. A brief exchange of books or notes became a delicate choreography of touch, posture, and eye contact. Each interaction was small, almost imperceptible to the outside world, but to him, it was a revelation, a slow unraveling of barriers and a gentle exploration of what it meant to care deeply for someone who seemed both distant and close at the same time. By the end of the day, he felt a mixture of exhilaration and unease. He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it had happened, but he knew something inside him had shifted irreversibly. The fascination had grown into something heavier, something that pulsed beneath the surface of ordinary life, a quiet, insistent longing that refused to be ignored. And as he walked away, replaying every glance, every brush of skin, every hint of vulnerability she had offered, he realized that he was no longer content to remain on the sidelines. The slow burn had begun, and it demanded attention, patience, and courage in equal measure. The quiet fascination that had been building between them now began to take on a weightier, more delicate form. It wasn't just admiration or curiosity anymore, it was the subtle stirrings of something deeper, a fragile thread of emotional intimacy that neither could ignore. The first time she truly let him see a glimpse of her vulnerability, it wasn't dramatic, it was almost accidental. Perhaps she sighed quietly during a conversation, her shoulders dipping slightly as though carrying a weight she didn't voice, or maybe she mentioned a disappointment in passing, brushing over it as if to protect herself. But he noticed. He noticed the tiny quiver in her voice, the momentary falter in her eyes, the way her hands fidgeted with a pen or a notebook, seeking some invisible anchor. He felt an almost protective instinct stir within him, a desire to bridge the gap between her composed exterior and the tender fragility she revealed in these fleeting moments. Yet with this desire came hesitation. He knew there were boundaries, social expectations, age differences, unspoken rules, and he wondered, not for the first time, if he had any right to step closer. Still, he couldn't help himself. He leaned in ever so slightly, offering a reassuring smile, a quiet presence that said, without words, "I see you, and I'm here." Their interactions began to carry a different kind of weight. Sitting across from her, he noticed the way her gaze lingered, her eyes searching his for understanding or reassurance. There was a subtle pause before she spoke, as though measuring each word, each emotion, to see if he could truly accept the depth she rarely revealed. And in those pauses, he felt the quiet tension of something unspoken, a hesitation that mirrored his own. He wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but he also feared overstepping, of making her retreat behind her carefully constructed walls. Even the simplest gestures became charged with meaning. When she brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, he caught the faint warmth of her skin, the delicate scent of her perfume lingering in the air between them. When their hands met briefly over a shared book or a cup of coffee, neither pulled away immediately. The contact was tentative yet lingering, a silent acknowledgement of trust slowly being extended. Every small movement, every fleeting glance, carried weight, as if the air itself had become thicker with unspoken emotions. He began to realize that this was what made her so captivating, the combination of strength and vulnerability. She was confident, composed, and self-assured, yet she allowed herself moments of fragility, moments that spoke of real human emotion and depth. And in those moments, he felt a magnetic pull he could not resist, a quiet insistence that drew him closer even as his mind cautioned restraint. By the end of their encounter, he felt both exhilarated and uncertain. There was a bond forming, delicate and fragile, that demanded careful attention. The emotional barrier was still there, yet it was beginning to soften, opening space for a deeper connection, one that required patience, empathy, and courage. And as he walked away, replaying every subtle gesture, every quiver of vulnerability, he knew that the slow burn was no longer just fascination. It had grown into something richer, something real. Something worth nurturing despite the fears and doubts that lingered in the corners of his mind. The moment of first physical affection didn't arrive with fanfare or a dramatic gesture. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet its impact was profound. It was a moment born out of vulnerability, a shared instance when words alone could no longer convey the emotions stirring between them. Perhaps she had mentioned a lingering worry, a memory that weighed on her, or maybe he had noticed her shiver under the soft hum of the evening air. Without thinking, he reached out, a simple, instinctive gesture, a hand brushing hers, a touch meant to comfort. Her reaction was subtle but unmistakable. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand lingered, just slightly, a silent acknowledgement that she trusted him enough to let that closeness exist. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken emotions. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a quiet elation, tempered by the hesitation that still lingered in the corners of his mind. There was no rush, no urgency, just a gentle, steady presence that allowed the intimacy to breathe and grow. The small gestures became a language of their own. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, letting his fingers trail just lightly along her cheek, careful, deliberate, almost reverent. She didn't flinch. Instead, her eyes softened, and he caught a fleeting smile, shy but genuine. In that moment, the unspoken tension between them crystallized into something tangible, a quiet desire, a need for connection that transcended words. Each small touch, the graze of fingers, the brief meeting of palms, was imbued with layers of meaning, a conversation of skin and proximity that neither dared to voice aloud. Even the way they positioned themselves spoke volumes. Sitting side by side, he noticed how she adjusted slightly, leaning just a fraction closer, as though her presence sought the comfort of proximity. He felt the gentle warmth of her shoulder against his, the subtle rhythm of her breathing syncing, almost imperceptibly, with his own. The world beyond that small circle seemed to dissolve, leaving only the quiet, intense connection that had been building for weeks, now allowed a small, tender expression. And then came the confession, soft, halting, yet powerful in its sincerity. She shared something deeply personal, a fear or a longing, and in that moment, the walls between them crumbled just enough for honesty to flow freely. He listened, completely present, absorbing every word, every tremor in her voice, every subtle shift in her posture. And when he finally spoke, his words were equally sincere, a mirror to her vulnerability. He didn't declare love, he didn't make promises. He simply acknowledged the depth of what he felt, the way her presence had begun to shape his thoughts, his emotions, his very heartbeat. By the end of the encounter, a quiet intimacy had taken root. They parted with lingering glances, hands that almost, but not quite, let go, and hearts racing with the realization that this connection was no longer just curiosity or fascination. It was something deeper, something fragile and precious that required care, patience, and courage. And as he walked away, replaying the warmth of her touch and the softness of her voice, he understood that this was the beginning of something that could no longer be contained by hesitation or fear. The slow burn had finally sparked into the first flame of emotional and physical closeness. Just as their connection had begun to feel steady, subtle, and safe, reality intruded, reminding them both of the delicate line they were walking. The tension wasn't explosive. It wasn't a fight or a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, insistent pressure that hovered in the background, making each interaction feel heavier than before. Perhaps it was the judgmental glance of a colleague, a casual remark from a friend about age differences, or even the cautious voice of her own mind questioning the appropriateness of their growing closeness. Whatever the source, it planted seeds of doubt in both of them, pulling at the fragile trust and intimacy they had so carefully nurtured. He felt it first in himself, a subtle tightening in his chest whenever she laughed with someone else, a hesitation before speaking when their hands brushed, a nervous questioning of whether he truly deserved the connection they had. The fascination that once felt effortless now carried with it a weighty awareness of their differences, her life experience, her composed confidence, and his own insecurities about age and perception. Every gesture, every glance, seemed charged with possibility and consequence all at once. She, too, wrestled with hesitation. The vulnerability she had begun to show felt exposed under scrutiny, real or imagined, and she questioned whether it was wise to let herself care so deeply for someone younger, someone whose world was still unfolding in ways hers already had. There was an internal push and pull, the undeniable warmth and understanding he offered versus the social and emotional risks that whispered caution. And yet, despite the hesitation, her heart responded to his presence in ways she couldn't ignore. A glance lingered, a hand brushed slightly against his arm, a quiet sigh as he shared a thought, tiny betrayals of desire that hinted at the depth of her feelings, even as her mind warned restraint. The tension was amplified in silence. Words felt inadequate to express the swirling uncertainty and longing, and every unspoken thought hung between them, heavy and palpable. Even ordinary actions, a shared coffee, walking side by side, reaching for the same object, carried the weight of questions neither dared voice aloud. He noticed the faint tremor in her hands when she tried to hide her emotions, the slight hesitation before meeting his gaze, and the subtle ways she tested the boundaries of closeness without fully committing. Each observation tightened the coil of anticipation, building a silent crescendo that neither could yet release. Yet, in the midst of hesitation, there was also clarity. He recognized that his fear, like hers, was a measure of how much he cared. The very fact that these moments felt charged and fragile proved that their connection mattered, more than convenience, more than curiosity. And she realized that the hesitation, the quiet internal debate, was not a sign of weakness, but of care, a recognition that what they shared was rare, delicate, and worth navigating with patience. By the end of this phase, the tension between them was almost tangible, a quiet, simmering energy that threatened to pull them apart and yet, paradoxically, drew them closer. Each glance, each accidental touch, each word left unsaid became a testament to the depth of their feelings, the stakes of their connection, and the slow-burn intensity that neither could deny. The conflict wasn't external, it was internal, emotional, deeply human, and it made the eventual closeness they were building all the more meaningful, ripe with anticipation and longing that would finally find release in the resolution to come. After weeks of glances, hesitant touches, and unspoken words, the tension that had quietly shaped their connection began to unravel into something warm, steady, and unmistakably real. The conflict, the hesitation, and the internal struggles that had loomed so large now gave way to clarity. They could no longer ignore the depth of their feelings, the way their presence calmed and excited each other all at once. The slow burn that had smoldered in moments of shared coffee, fleeting touches, and lingering eye contact was now ready to fully illuminate the space between them. The first acknowledgement was quiet, almost tender in its simplicity. No grand declarations or dramatic confessions, just a gentle admission of care and connection. He reached for her hand, deliberately, confidently this time, allowing their fingers to intertwine naturally. She didn't hesitate. Instead, she shifted closer, her shoulder brushing his, her warmth seeping into him like sunlight through a window. In that small, intimate gesture, months of tension, longing, and hesitation were distilled into one effortless moment of trust and emotional honesty. Their interactions began to feel effortless, infused with a natural rhythm that had been missing before. Sitting together, their knees lightly touching, she allowed her hand to rest on his arm when she laughed, and he felt a quiet joy in the simple press of her fingers. Words flowed more easily, soft laughter mingling with comfortable silences that carried their own meaning. The age difference, once an obstacle shadowing their connection, now felt like a quiet, inconsequential detail. Her life experience balanced his youthful perspective, and together they discovered a rare harmony in the way they complemented each other. Physical gestures, always subtle and respectful, became a language of intimacy they both understood. A light brush of her hair behind her ear, the gentle resting of her hand against his chest as they shared a quiet moment, the fleeting warmth of her cheek brushing his shoulder, all became symbols of trust, affection, and shared vulnerability. Each touch reinforced what words could only hint at, that their connection was real, mutual, and cherished. Emotionally, they were no longer guarded. Vulnerabilities that had once trembled beneath the surface were now met with open arms and compassionate understanding. He listened with full attention, offering support without judgment. She responded with quiet smiles and honest words that reflected her trust and growing love. Moments that once carried hesitation now shimmered with ease, a soft laugh shared over a small joke, the brush of fingers while reaching for the same cup of tea, the mutual thrill of simply being present with one another. By the story's end, they were inseparable in a quiet, human way. Their connection was no longer about fascination, doubt, or hesitation. It was about acceptance, warmth, and the profound joy of finding someone who truly understood and valued them. The slow burn had reached its gentle peak, leaving behind a satisfying, emotionally resonant conclusion. They walked together through the world, hand in hand, hearts synchronized, and the lingering tension of uncertainty replaced by the steady, comforting rhythm of shared affection and love. It was a love that had grown from curiosity into fascination, from fascination into emotional intimacy, and finally into a fully realized, tender romance. Age, experience, and social expectations no longer mattered. What remained was the quiet, enduring truth. They had found in each other the person who made ordinary moments extraordinary, someone whose presence felt like home, trust, and the subtle thrill of desire, all at once.